the second time that someone has gotten sick, Paul Bonnifield comes to save the day. He is one of the premier historians of Routt County, has nothing short of a PhD in all history as far as I'm concerned, and has lived in Routt County forever and a day. And we're so blessed that he is willing to jump into action and share with us his knowledge, especially when our speaker had to cancel. And we'd like to have Paul anyway, he speaks every year basically. But we're extra happy to have him tonight and so grateful. So thank you, Paul, and help me welcome Paul.
Katie called me about 11:30 today. What are you going to talk about tonight? How in the hell do I know? Anyhow, what I thought I would do is the sand wash and the sand wash courses. Everybody, a good many of you at least, have been out there and you know well about it. And I thought what I would do, instead of talking about it being feral horses or horses that are, talk about the story of the horses. When you look at them, the horses in the sand wash, the horses in northwestern Colorado, southern Wyoming, that whole area, represent the story of the West. What you see there, you're looking at, and you see the animals, a whole complex story of the Trans-Mississippi West. You see just 50 miles north of Baggs, here's the monument. That's where the Overland Trail came through. That's where Mark Twain was through. And all of the major travel through that area. Well, horses got loose, people got things, and so on and went with it. It's a place that many things have happened. So what I thought, you could start it at many parts. But I'm going to start with what was then known and still known as the Old Spanish Trail, which actually is not an old trail. In terms of the West, in 1827, Jedediah Smith led some trappers down through Utah, across the Mojave Desert into California. But while he was there, because California is the land of the horses, as longhorn cattle are in Texas, the horses are California. Well, he stole, literally, not figuratively, stole a large herd of horses and drove them north. The Native Americans, the Indians, caught him on what became known as Smith River in Oregon, killed most of his men, took most of his horses, and he got away. But Smith got away and reported about the horses in California. Now, many people started, but the mountain men were the greatest horse thieves of all of the people that's in the country. And that's literally so. Peg-Leg Smith, just to pick one man, Peg-Leg Smith had been over along about where Edwards is now. In fact, that was the stream there, the slow water, was known as Smith's Fishery in that area. And the Arapaho or the Utes, one of them got after him, and he headed into North Park. He got shot in the leg, either by accident himself or habit. Well, he was supposed to die, but being what he was, he didn't. So he cut his own leg off, you know. And then he had it seared, but he was still supposed to die, and still didn't. And winter was coming, so they put him in a sling and took him out to Browns Park. Well, earlier, he had had his horses stolen by the Cara, a leader in Utah, a major leader, and he walked in the middle of the camp to get his horses back. He and Wakara hit it off very well. He just stayed. But Wakara was in Browns Park and sent some of these flies down, and they spit herbs on the Smith's leg, and it got well. And somebody cut his, made him a peg leg, so he became Peg-Leg Smith. Well, then they rode to California and started stealing horses. And every year, now he wasn't the best trapper in the world, but he was a damn good horse thief. And every year they would bring back 1,500 to 2,000 horses. And they could then, and they stopped, you see, bringing them across, and they would be everything else with it, to winter them and rest them in what became Browns Park, that general area of the area of Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, right on the corner there, because it was good winter country, and then would take them on east and sell them. Well, another mountain man, Walker, Walker Pass in California, he was out there and he stole a bunch of horses, brought them back, came into Bent's Fort. Kearney at that time had marched from Morrisburg to Bent's Fort and was getting ready to invade New Mexico in the Mexican War. So it was the California horses that he remounted Kearney's army on, one they sold, and headed them back, and it was California horses that carried Kearney's army to California to conquer California, New Mexico. The story of the horses that goes on with it, you see. Then with the end of about 1875, excuse me, when the United States then takes over California, the trappers decided, well, it's not American to go out there and steal horses, so they stopped their horse stealing. But then, of course, you had the gold rush, and the people that were rushing over the Overland Trail. Now, the Overland Trail didn't open up until 1863. Before that, they traveled over the Oregon Trail, but the Indian uprisings on the Oregon Trail caused them to move the stage line down south, and the major chops through just north of Baggs, about 50 miles. And from then on, of course, that had been the Cherokee Trail, which it's one of those things, naming after the opening the trail was the Cherokee Indians going to California for the gold rush. But the Utes, 1963 and on, there was a lot of wars, Indian wars going on and so on. They closed the Overland Trail, started raiding there was a military fort that they would raid in other places along it. Well, horses got away. See, it was a mix of horses that were there. Then it comes the Morgan family in the late 1860s. Well, 1868, you had the White River Agency that is established where Meeker is now. Well, it was up in the Yellow Jacket Pass and then moved. But the White River Agency, well, they were freighting down to the agency. Well, they had horses. They raised a lot of horses. And they traveled with horses as well as others that came in. So you have horse ranchers. One of the things we don't talk about in the West, you talk about cattle ranches and cowboys, but there was more horse ranches than there were, in a way, than there were cattle ranches. And the horse ranches were here before the cattle were. McIntosh, who had a good deal to do up at Hans Peak, he goes down to Slater, and he goes into the horse business. And he got a government permit in 1909 to go on the Forest Service. It was for 1,200 horses. He ran, and they all of them ran big horses. When you go to the sand wars, you'll find the horses that are draft horse size or big horses, have a lot of fetlocks on them, heavy manes and tails and heavy head. Well, the market price, or the market, was for heavy horses. You had draft horses, you had coach horses, and all the rest. You go out in the sand wars, you see all of these white studs that are out there, the old horses, roan nose and big. Well, they're a Perchean. Their bloodline is a Perchean bloodline. That was coach horses that were being just raised. And take in mind, a good many of the people up until the 1940s and the horse business just simply disappeared, they considered themselves to be ranchers, you see. They would brand their horses and try to keep their horses and everybody did, and they ran them on open range, the same as the cattlemen did. The early settlers, the Vaughns, and you go up, what is it, I can't think of the name of the draw right now. But anyhow, the Vaughn families, the Boone draw, well, he was Boone Vaughn. That was his horse pasture, right next to the sandbush. You see, on over with them, the whole bunch of them was there. The Vaughns were well known for their horses. When they left over there around the western part of Moffat County, they were moved to Mexico. They took 2,000 horses with them. Now that's, you know, a big operation of horses. The ranchers out there, the 2 bars, they mounted their men around that time on 16 horses. So in order, now they worked them 2 weeks, I believe it was, and then it was 8 head, and then 2 weeks, and they rested them back and forth. Now most of the ranches were just 8 horses instead of 16, but for all of the riders, think how many horses that takes, plus the mares to raise the coals, plus the studs to raise them, and they're all running in open country out there. And they, all of them, because they have bigger horses. The reason that you, northern areas, that is Colorado, Wyoming, and on, are known for their saddle bronc riders rather than those in Texas, is they were big, strong horses. It had the fetlock in the leg, and they could jar you and were pretty mean with them. But Kid Vaughn, who was known as a bronc rider, a great bronc rider, he finally committed suicide because his stomach was 2 inches lower than the horses driving him down. And he's 30. So one historian says in Moffat County, 11 rough string riders wound up committing suicide because those horses, see, you didn't break a horse until they were 4 or 5, and they just ran them in the spring and gathered them in and started riding them. And if they could, well, as my dad said, if they could turn them around in 40 acres, they were doing pretty good. Because they didn't put a rein on, they didn't. They just got you to get on and go and chase a cow, and they rode hard all day with them. And that was the life that they had with them. When I was in the 1980s, and when hard times came, I got to know Cecil Connors very well. Well, Cecil Connors and Boyd Walker were the last 2 full-time horse owners out in the sand horse country. And that was their business during the 30s and early 40s. And Cecil told me quite a little bit about the horses, how they ran them, and what you could see. Now, as you go up 7 Mile Ridge, above, see Sand Horse down below you, the Little Snake River is off to one side. As you come up on top, you go along the ridge there, you'll see for about a mile, a string of just, down below, a string of just cedars, the trees that have been cut and stacked and what have you. Well, that's the wing going into a trap for the horses. As you go on down the road, and you'll see a cable. Now they start to come up the road, starts to climb, there's a cedar right there next to the road. And there's a cable stuck in that tree, tied on it. You follow that cable down just a short distance, and you will walk into a horse trap. The horse traps you see, what they would do, as Cecil said, and there was some, see, you never bailed a big one. It wasn't an idea to run a lot of horses in at one time. You would build it, and you'd bring the horses up a hill, and then they would drop off where they thought they were getting away. Then you would head them down and get them in a run then, and head them down the the wing and into a trap. You had a tarp over the top, so you just drifted down. That was nothing ever went back through it, but they didn't have time to swing a gate. The horse you were riding went on into it. Sam Carr said when he was a boy, he was raised up over in Browns Park. Excuse me, raised in Browns Park. He said they would have a boy, they have to hide, you see, and a horse can see from a distance, a long ways. That's because their eyesight and their speed is what makes it possible for them, and that's why they stay in the open countries, in the deserts, like they have out in the sand wash. He said, well, if somebody moves a mile and a half or 2 miles away, and you're trying to drive them that way, they won't go there. And so you've got to stay hid, so they had little blinds, and the kids would stay in behind. But by the time you got up to that running horses, they would, the people driving their horses would be too tired, so they'd have the boy jump out and run the horses in and stampede them on into the trap, because once the horse went in, they were coming back out, unless there was some way to get them trapped right away. If you go up there on the sand wash and see it, the trap is there, and you'll see the top rail is a big, heavy rail that sets in there. The reason for it, and they're up high, all the traps are water.
Okay, yeah. Would you like to hear it?
Not right now.
Okay.
Well, yes, I would, but no.
We think it's water.
It is Rocky Mountain water, but I understand what I'm doing. But the top rail, you see, because the horse, you keep them from climbing out, and you can't reach the top to hold them, and it's a small area. As Cecil said, you see, when they would start to run the horses or start to gather them, you couldn't take horses that were close to the trap, because they knew where it was at and they wouldn't win it. So you had to pick your bunch that was off somewhere away from that. You'd go out in the mornings and start them. And you didn't make any difference which direction you started them. And one man would go one way and one another, and then they'd turn. And you go over here and another guy turn. And you turn him, and you turn him. Taught them to drive. You see, otherwise, and once you got them taught to drive, they would travel, but you kept them at a slower rate of speed, so the colts could keep up with them. Try to keep them at a trot all the time. So they kept them moving, but you didn't want them running until the last minute. So everything would stay together. You never wanted to run into another bunch of horses. You see, the studs go to fight and everything else would go and mess it all up. So you had to keep. And so you only used there'd be 6 to 8 horses in the bunch that you're running. But now, and they could get them in, but now once you got them in, how the hell do you get them out? What are you doing? You drive them in there, what they would do, now if they had only a couple of horses, they would catch them and put a halter on them, and halter break them to lead. Literally right there, but otherwise they would take and put a rope around their middle, back of their rib cage, you see, so it wasn't too tight, so they could still breathe, and then tie up one leg, so they were 3-legged and hobbled. Now they could travel, and sometimes travel, when you turn them out, they travel pretty fast, but eventually then you get a mare in front of them, and they would start following the mare, and you could get them in. As long as you only had a small group, that is 6 horses, 8 horses, but no more than that, and you had the men with them. He also told, though, you see, in 1933, it was a tremendous drought year, and there was no water in the water holes and everything, and the Little Snake River had gone dry, except there was water running underneath the sand. So the horses, bunches of horses, would come down at different places and dig down in the sand until they could get a sip of water. Well, all of the rest of the wildlife would be standing back, waiting till the horses finished, and then they could go water. It was a survival thing that went on for all of them during the drought. And the horses, and Cecil said one of the things they would do, he and Boyd Walker, they would rope those horses. Now, a horse, a loose horse, will outrun you, except when they get them full of water. And then they couldn't go for a little ways and up a hill. You had a short distance, you could catch them. And so they caught 3 or 4, half a dozen that way, not many. There was a sport for them in the summer times to try to rope a wild horse. Mostly it was a failure, but they had their fun at it. They'd make a little bet on it. You see, a horse is worth so much, and that's what they were betting that it was worth. There was, with them, you see, the ownership of horses that was out there. Old Shorty Gal's Creel he was badly crippled all the time. Cecil talked about him. Could hardly walk, but he'd get him on a horse. He was something else. But over in Powder Wash, and then on up towards Adobe town, in that part of Wyoming, in that area, he specialized in raising paint horses. And I don't know, I can't remember the name, but there was a famous paint horse that was just recently out in the Sand Porch. Well, that was one of Shorty Creel's horses. He bred big horses, fast horses, and good, well-built horses. And they were strong. And his business was raising paint horses. But old Shorty, according to George Salisbury, Salisbury's also ran a lot of horses, and up at Slater, he said, Shorty came in one day, had a bunch of dogs. Shorty always worked alone, where most guys had somebody with him. He had a bunch of dogs, and he asked him if he could leave the dogs there for the winter while he went to California. Get away from the weather here. Well, Shorty went to California, married a widow, and never came back and got his dogs. But George was stuck with him. Where else do I want to go with horses? With them, also in the spring of the year with the ranches, because the horses were there were large numbers of them, and it was a big roundup. You would go out to Two-Bar Spring. See, there used to be a long drive up there on the side of it, so you could turn the horses and bring them in. And they would start gathering horses along in March for a roundup that started in June. The horse was the thing with them. Now, also with the horses, that add to or change or different is the tempos of movement of people coming in and out. See, in 1880, now, there was settlers here before, and people did take up land, but generally speaking, they did not get a homestead until there was a baseline survey ran, so you could locate each section, township, and so on. And the 40th parallel was ran about 1880 to 1882 in this area. So you have then the first wave of really settlers coming in, homesteaders, and a lot of things went wrong with them, besides not having good transportation. You see, the main road, the mail, that came in, first mail came into Hayden at this time. Now, it had been earlier, but at this time came in around Rawlins, Wyoming. Because over the passes, that is Berthoud, in that direction, stayed snowbound until late in summers. One of the mail carriers out of Grant County talks about how they had their garden crop in. That is, they were getting their radishes and those things, and they couldn't get any flour over top of the pass, and they were wanting some flour pretty bad. It was a good, bad situation for them because of the Front Range in there. Well, when the people starved out, they left their horses. Now, cattle and pigs, you could sell them. The horses, what were you going to do with them? So they just left them. That's part of what you find in the breeding in the sand wars. Then in the 90s, see, Moffat was planning on bringing a railroad through here. There was a talk of a railroad coming. And again, there was a big rush of settlers coming in because they're going to be the early worm. And it didn't work. So they left. Then 1900 came the big settlement areas of homesteaders coming in to Routt County. Well, it was all good until the end of World War I, and the market fell. And there was so much production across the whole United States. See, one of the interesting things that happened in that period of time in the United States and in much of the Western world is for the first time in history, they could produce enough food to feed everybody. Now that doesn't mean their transportation was there, but there was a surplus, literally, a surplus of wheat and grain crops. Well, in 1921, 22, when out in the, I can't think of the place, just west of Craig, the homesteading in there, they just left their wheat and their crops because there was no value and left. 85% of them did, and across the whole area. Well, all their horses, they left. You see, they didn't have any use for that horse. What were they going to do with it? So they just went someplace else. And that was a story that happened across much of the West. When the Depression hit, or else when tractors came in or something else, they just left them. So that's part of what you find in the sand wars. When you look at the horses there, and their social gatherings and everything, the horses, it's really a unique place. A very unique place to me. And besides that, it's a desert, or semi-desert. It's a place that no one really wants but a horse. I guess how much time, I'll quit with that and let you ask some questions at this time. How long have I been?
It's 6:08 right now.
Oh, 6:08? All right, let me just go ahead with questions, and then I'll get back to some. All right.
Was, when they had like 2,000 of them, was there every winter still enough,
What's that?
enough meat for them to
No,
open range?
it was all open range. That was one of the things they had. So when you asked the question how much feed there was, winter killing was a fairly high thing when they had big numbers. If they wound up having, the same as any time, if you overgraze it or if the drought comes in or something else, it was very common. In fact, it was assumed that you would lose so many horses winter killed because no one, you see, you fed your cows, if you had hay, you fed your cows. Now the open range people did not, but the rest of them fed them, but they never fed your horses. This was true of those that were in around Yampa or Toponas or any of those areas. In fact, in hard winter, 1919, they were down to where they were eating the bark off of the aspen trees, which It was a hard thing for all of them. And your colt crop, see how many and how strong they were and everything else depended upon that winter. And a lot of times you didn't have colts. So there was a lot of horses running out there that were just horses running out there. And you had all them damn studs. See? And what do you do with those? You know, so it was not very profitable thing, but during the time of horse and buggy, during the time when they were building railroads and roads and towns and everything else, a draft horse was in demand. And so what you had, and if you lost some, you just lost some and took the rest. See, you left them run out there, they were 4 or 5 year olds, to start breaking them to ride. Well, hell, you know, that's a tough time to start doing. They just literally ran them in and saddled up, and somebody rode them until you got to where you could ride them, and that was it. The same is true, say, over at Burns, when Benton's had theirs, and the rodeos they used to have at the Ponus and at Burns Hole, they gathered the wild horses off of King Mountain for their bucking horses. And their wild horse race as well. Other questions? Oh, here we go.
So I didn't know until tonight that a lot of these horses here came from California. I recently read a book about a young man who signed on to a merchant sea vessel that sailed from Boston around the Horn and back up to Monterey, California. And he commented on how many horses, just like he called them millions of horses that he saw from the coast of LA up to San Francisco. Where did all those come from?
Breeding. Those horses, no, a horse is a highly, unless they have a natural enemy, highly reproductive. In the histories of California, see, back during the Spanish period and that, they talked about gathering the horses and putting them in and spearing them. There were so many of them that they would just killing them, get rid of them. The horses was, you know, that's the same problem they have today with the federal government. And what do we do with all of the damn wild horses because they are so productive? See, they don't have many natural enemies. Out in the open country like that, a horse, they can see, and they will, they're always something to look at, and they're always looking. You get a saddle horse here that's been raised here that's outside, and you'll see, look like my horses, they're always something, and they're looking. And they see and they run. And they go in bunches, and they're big enough, see, the big horses, that they just simply do not have that many enemies. There's not too many things that can get them. You just go out there, I'm sure some of you have, you go out there into the sand wash or up into Wyoming, you'll see that way out there somewhere, that white spot of just a lone stud out there by himself. Well, there's nothing bothering him. He's the biggest thing out there. Probably the only thing out there. You know?
You know, my dad and his brother grew up in Albuquerque, and that's what they made their living, roping wild horses and breaking them and selling them. And so when we came here, and they told me there was wild horses in the sand wash, you know, my wife and I, we went out, and that was most of our entertainment on weekends, was driving out there and seeing these magnificent animals, healthy, strong, vibrant, and then all of a sudden, you know, they started coming in and corralling them and taking them out because they were starving. Well, I didn't see one. I saw a couple of dead animals that died in a stud fight, but I never saw a starving horse. Then we go back out, and there was 10,000 sheep in the starving area of the horses. Now tell me what the problem is there.
Well, you're into a long, long fight there, and I'm not.
I don't
There's too many gunmen out there.
I never back down from a fight.
But you know, the point he does have though, is just watching the horses out there. Now, one time, my wife and I and some others, we came upon a bunch in the spring. You see, the stud, and he has his mares there. And then there were just off from them a little ways, 3 or 4 horses studs that he had driven off. And then there's another old stud that's got a very young mare. And another one who shows up and challenges the old stud. Well, the old stud, instead of fighting, runs around behind the other horse and yeah. Another time we were out there, and they were just and on the road. You see this old stud coming down the road, and there was a band up there of 5 or 6 horses with a heck of a good looking stud, and then was another young stud with a young mare. Well, this one old stud kept trying to challenge the younger stud. Very quick, the younger stud goes down and talks to the major stud. The major stud comes down and talks to the one, and he leaves. There's some kind of social contact, some kind of society that they have figured out that keeps going. When you go to the water holes out there, this is in Wyoming that I'm talking about, where there's the ponds for them. You see one bunch will go in and another bunch will wait. And this one will deliberately move out, and another one can get in the water. So there's some kind of organization that's going on in order that they can peacefully all get in and drink, that they can all get out. And when it comes to, you know, what they do, and then you'll find them, you'll see the younger studs, 2 or 3 of them, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, not fighting each other. When they get into a fight, have you ever seen one? They've got a lot of scars. They're mean. And they can be, when those heads come down and those ears are out, you better get the hell out of the way because they're coming. And so,
It sounds like there was a lot of horse thievery back in the day. And I'm wondering, was that the cause of a lot of altercation, or were there enough wild horses going around that you got your horses stolen and you just went and grabbed some more?
yes. All right. The thing is, there was, and he has points there. You see, when it came to back in the 1880s, 1890s, on up till 1940, there'd be so many people, different ones, who claimed, this is my horses. This is my horses. But you see, maybe you keep them branded, maybe you couldn't keep them branded, but yes, there was trouble between them. I can't write off the top of my head that Cecil was talking about, he and Ernest Lang. Ernest Lang ran a bunch of horses into somebody else up on the Snake River, Little Snake River. And one of the guys manning him below, he claimed those horses and he got off with his rifle. And Cecil said, we never said a word to him, we just opened up the gate and turned our horses loose. Lang, Ernie Lang, not Lang. He was a unique man in his own way with him. He's had a homestead that was just up the Little Snake River from the 2 bars headquarters. And every poor soul that came by, they could always find eggs because he had chickens and pancakes there and someplace to stay. And Lang would, and he had been in the cavalry during the First World War, but he would never use a bit on a horse. Always had a halter. So you didn't want to jerk him up, he said. So he would have, the guy was telling me one time that they ran a bunch of horses in, and they had one of Ernie's horses there that was branded. So they called him, and got hold of him and let him know. So Lang comes over and saddles the horse that was in the corral, and turns his horse loose and went off walking down the road. And he was, but then Cecil told me, he said they drove, the land got hold of him, and they drove a bunch of horses in the creek. They stopped the night at Mayville there at the Willow Creek Corrals, and then on in. But when they came back, Ernie was feeling pretty tough, and he stopped and bought a heavy coat. Well, the next thing he knew, Lang was dead because of a tick fever. You know, and a couple the men who ran wild horses, because that was fast work, hard work, no matter how you went, they were going to be hurt. It was just a matter of when and how bad. She just, old Cecil said they had a really good looking horse that they had a buyer, a dealer, and he said, don't bring him back for us to break. Well, he brought him back for him to break. So the horse came over backwards on him and broke him up pretty bad. See, that was in the days when you either got well or you died. Your choices were that.
I got a quick question. So are there really, every year, too many horses in Vermilion Basin that they need to round them off for population control then?
Yes and no. Probably, you see the horses out there in the sand wars in that area, they're actually a range horse. They're fenced in. They can't just drift wherever they want to. So their numbers are limited with them. So you can have, in the drought years we've had here since 2000, and not wanting to wind up dying or something in the wintertime, if there is a problem to want to round them up. Now they have started to, yes, giving them a shot so they don't have their colds. But how successful that is, I don't know. But it's a real problem. You see, you were talking about there on the horses, the wild horses. A few years ago, we drove down through and went by the Navajo reservation and what have you. God, there was a lot of horses, and they were dying. You see, they had rubbed the whole place off, and there was sick and dying horses everywhere. The same is true on some of the other Indian reservations, because they can't get to them for whatever reasons. You see, they're supposed to be feral horses or whatever the reasons are. And you can get too many, you can get too few, and nobody's ever going to get the right number. And when I talk about, you see, the history of all those horses having, there's a gal at Hayden that'd be up in arms right now because she's saying they're feral horses. She was in the crowd now. She'd be speaking harshly at me. Go ahead.
So, I went to Kansas City where they took a lot of these wild horses, and they had them all corralled, and there was bidders that were coming in from Mexico, taking wild horses, and one of the guys, I'm saying, wow, you must really want to break horses and all that. But I think part of that came back as dog food.
Oh, I would be surprised.
Yeah,
Good.
and that really pissed me off. We were up. Whatever happened to the survival of the fittest in wild animals? The elk do it, the deer do it. Why can't the wild horses do that? Yeah, we saw a few fights that happened, another stallion died. Well, we know another stallion died, but rounding them up and making dog food of them, I'd rather let them fight and survive.
Let me answer your question. What happened to the horses on the Navajo reservation? They ran out of feed and they starved, thousands of them. I see people getting ready to leave, so I guess we're just about ready to quit. All right. Any more questions? I didn't mean to shut everybody up. Thank you for listening to my ramblings. I really had just a little bit of time. Thank you.